Heidi, great to see you. Thanks for taking a bit of time to come and have a chat with me. I want to kick off by reflecting back something that you said to me in our last conversation. You said women's health data is not really included in the kind of the health data that's out there. I mean, it's mainly male data. And I thought that's an extraordinary thing to say, given, that it's 2026. I mean, how did that happen? Why is it important to you?
Look, healthcare system has been built by men for men. The world has been built by men for men. So it goes beyond healthcare, but that's where I'm focused. And it's not a slogan. It's evidence
Yeah,
behind that.
yeah, yeah.
So if you look at, the FDA in 1977 recommended to exclude women that were of potential childbearing age. So not women carrying babies, women, and you can imagine, I mean, the potential of childbearing age is quite a big
Yeah.
range of age. And so only until 1993 did they say, actually, the recommendation is we have to include women in studies. But that means that in that whole, so quite modern medicine, all that time, the drug discoveries were based on men, applied to women, and we're paying the price for it. So to me, the importance is we're 51% of the population. If we're not even 50%, we're actually, there's more women than men.
Yeah.
And we need to cater for women and for the needs that we have and they're specific to us. We're not small men. We don't want to pink and shrink everything and say, look, that's applicable to women now because, we changed it a little bit. They're a bit smaller.
Yeah.
And you see it across, you see it in the healthcare sector. You see it in women then when they go into their doctors with a cardiac event. Doctors were originally trained to recognize the big cowboy moment that men have, which is, oh, the chest pain.
Yeah.
Women don't show the same symptoms. So, unfortunately, women very often get misdiagnosed, and we have a much higher chance of dying from a cardiac event
Which is
because of that.
which is crackers, isn't it, really? It's absolutely mad. I mean, I've got three sisters and they are not little blokes. I can tell you that for nout. I mean, it's just madness, really, isn't it? But I mean, what I'm also interested in is does that matter to you? Because you're doing something about it, aren't you? And tell us why it's so important to you particularly, and also tell us about what you're going to do about that.
So, I mean, it's important to me because I'm a woman. It's important to me because I'm a scientist. I'm a mother of a daughter. It's important to me because of friends and family. There's lots of reasons why it's important to me. But I suppose as a scientist, I was trained the way you're trained, which is, you go through and you do, you go to college, you learn what you're supposed to do, and you do cell culture if you're working at that level, and then you do trials if you're working in science. And I actually did a lot of my studies only on male cell culture,
Right.
never reflected on it, by the way. And it's quite embarrassing to say now, never reflected on it. Then I went on and I ran mouse trials on only male mouse because they were just simpler. Then we ran clinical trials and we were saying, let's do the first ones without the women because they're too complicated. Those cycles just change the results. And we just did it. I did it. And I designed some of those trials. And that's really embarrassing to say now. And it was just when I really started looking into the women's health data and realized actually I've been doing what everybody else has been doing. And it made me quite angry
Yeah.
to see that we haven't been included. And as I looked further into that, it shows that, yes, we have never really been included. But as women go through midlife, where there's huge changes happening in our health and we have symptoms, so perimenopause being that transition that I'm focused on, nobody had done anything. Like there is no data. And it just shows that there's been kind of focus on fertility. And as women get older, we just get put on the shelf. That's, you're not being
Yeah.
seen and we
Yes.
don't feel seen.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing that's really important is that the data is becoming increasingly important as systems are able to collect data at scale in a way that they haven't previously. I mean, it's really important that that data reflects reality, isn't it?
Well, 100%. And what we're seeing now is not that yet. It's changing. And that's what we're doing at Perry. So I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Peri. And if you haven't understood it yet, I'm a scientist by background, and so is my co-founder. But we've applied our science to make a difference to women by starting Peri. And with Peri, the whole aim was to collect data that is specific to women that can help women transition through perimenopause. Our first product is a wearable. It's a wearable device that was purpose built for women going through perimenopause. It isn't a wearable where we added a feature or tried to, change it or, to basically design it for men and apply it to women. It was always meant for women going through perimenopause. And we are now able to detect symptoms of perimenopause based on the body. So taking away that guesswork that women tend to have their whole lives going through the healthcare system and giving them real data behind what's going on in their bodies. Also giving them information they can use to navigate perimenopause with real information.
And just at a very practical level, I mean, what can they do with that data? So if you give me give a woman a load of data, just give us some practical examples of how that would benefit her.
So if you look at how women navigate perimenopause today, we're asked to self-report and try and understand our bodies, which is really, really difficult. So the first thing, as I said, is yes, you get the data, you get information, which is data over time. You get your weekly, your monthly. That's helpful. But the second thing that we built was an AI engine that takes all of that data from that woman and personalizes what the next step for her should be based on what we can see is working. And that doesn't exist today. And what we know is that as women go through perimenopause, it's a really personal journey. So my symptom profile is very different from my friend's symptom profile. What works for me is very different from what works for my friend. So women tend to speak and they try and tell each other what's working, but it doesn't apply to their friends. It's great to have the conversation open. So what Perry allows them to do is that they get personalized feedback on what works for them so that they don't have to navigate in the blind. The second thing is arming them with data when they go to see their healthcare professional. So in the US, it would be the OBGYNs, or in the UK and Ireland, it would normally be your kind of GP that you would go to first with your perimenopausal symptoms. What's happening is a lot of them haven't been trained on menopause. Less than 80% have less than 2 hours training in menopause. And we have done interviews with GPs and OBGYNs, and they actually say, oh, I find it really stressful when they come in with these symptoms. And there is a term that's used, which is called whiny women, that is known in the US. And that's what doctors would call us back in the, like, no, not even back in the day, like still probably in some clinics, particularly in the US, whiny women, because they have no diagnostic tools and they're basing it on what are your symptoms. So with Perry, you can now go in and say, look, these are my symptoms. This is the symptom profile. What's our next step? And if they're given hormone therapy, which is the first line of therapy, or if there's lifestyle changes, they can actually track and see if it works instead of
Really
guessing and trying
empowering
to figure
women
out.
to take control of their healthcare, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and I suppose we've always had to take care, well, take ownership of our own health. And women are quite good at it. I would say better than men in general. And you can see we're the biggest healthcare spenders. We care about our health, but the problem has been that it's very, very hard to take ownership of your health when you have no information behind that. So you're really trying to navigate this with guesswork. So it's important to give information. I know we say data, and it is data, but we're not just trying to give data. We're trying to give information they can use
Yeah.
that's useful for their next step so that they can continue to take that ownership and make the right decisions, but based on real information.
Yeah. And one of the things I love about entrepreneurs is that, I mean, generally speaking, not all of them, but generally speaking, they're involved in something that is about challenging the status quo. I mean, and you're clearly in a space that's about challenging the status quo, changing the way things work currently. I mean, how do you feel about that experience? I mean, I've talked to a lot of people who say, well, it's a pretty big battle changing the status quo because people are often, they don't like change. I mean, how have you felt about that? I mean, have doctors responded positively? Have other people responded positively to what you're doing, or are you still fighting an uphill struggle?
There's lots of challenges when you're battling the status quo, and when it's women's health, that's certainly what you're doing because there's been centuries of
Yeah.
things being done differently. What I do find really encouraging is that it is changing and there's now, a light on women's health. And I would say the main reason for that is that us as women have woken up, and as we're educating more women, they're getting, I wouldn't say angry, but they're having a wake up moment, probably a little bit angry initially, and then finding a way to use that anger into actually action. And what women are really good at doing is they're really good at doing stuff for other people. So they might not even be doing it for themselves. They're doing it for the women in their community. So yes, it's challenging, but it feels, I have never had so much respect for women as I have now after starting this and seeing how engaged they get when they hear that this is different. When we collected data initially, we had women coming in that thought we were 20 years away from market launch, which we weren't, but that was their thought process. And they came in and they said, I'm doing this because I don't want anybody else to go through what I went through, or I don't want my daughters to go through it that way. So I look at it as, yes, it's a battle. It's tough. It's tough to get funding. We've had men sitting on the other side of the table in VC saying, it's not really a disease, is it? It's a bit niche. I
Mm.
mean, it's not niche. I don't need to tell you that.
55% of
And
the
I think
population.
most, yeah,
55% of the population is not niche, is it?
no, it really isn't. But what we can see is that, that was the conversations we were having a few years ago. I was just in San Francisco now this month for JP Morgan Health Conference. And I mean, the amount of events around women's health,
Mm.
the documents that came out on investments in women's health and how it's not only good for a population to keep women healthy, but it's investable. Like you can get returns on it.
Yeah.
So I'm just seeing the light there, and we've been working towards that. And I am not saying that it's going to be easy from now on. But when you're working for something you really feel passionate about, it's just you'll just go through those things. And I feel like I have so many women behind me,
Mm.
backing me. I don't feel alone.
Well,
I might be here running a company, but I don't feel alone. And my co-founder is male, and I feel he's always there as well. And that's the other thing that we're seeing now is getting the men on board to be our allies
mm.
so that we don't have to just push ourselves, that it becomes something that everybody wants to do. And I saw that in San Francisco, and that's really encouraging.
Yeah, it's really positive, isn't it? Uh, and I think also your point about not feeling isolated is important. A lot of CEOs end up feeling isolated. It's good. It's good to hear that you don't feel so isolated in that situation. Let me ask you about the business model. I mean, it's a great piece of technology. I mean, how does the business model work? I mean, people are thinking, okay, well, you produce this data, you get the data from the individual users, you collect the data, I mean, so just explain how that business model, or how it's evolving, how does it work? Because some people may not understand why this is investable.
Yeah, so I suppose we, like with any product, and I think particularly in women's health, and you're going into kind of that health and wellness sector, um, it evolves over time, and you start somewhere, and that that's not the forever model. So currently we are a direct to consumer, meaning we are selling straight to women,
Right.
as a once off cost. The reason for that is, and you asked me earlier, and I didn't really answer that, but we have been talking to doctors, and yes, menopause specialists get the value of it. But when you go outside of that, and that's a growing number of clinics, but there's still few of them compared to your GPs and your OBGYNs that you normally go to first. They're not willing to make the change, but women are, and women are demanding better care and help. So as we looked at this, we're like, we have to give this to women. They're the ones driving this. This is a bottom-up approach. Once they've heard enough women come into that clinic and say, look, you need to treat me better, I have data, it has to move the needle, and they have to understand that they need to change their care. So we are direct to consumer. We're using those women. We're building a community of women that will push this forward so that we can work towards a model where we work with healthcare clinics with the aim of actually changing how it's managed from day one, in a clinic. We are currently working with some kind of telehealth clinics in early phases to see how we can work with them. They're menopause specialists. They're not the general ones. So that's kind of the second tier. The other thing is that there's, particularly in the US, a lot of companies offer wellness,
Yeah,
packages.
there's a lot around, aren't there?
There is. And what we're seeing in the workforce, unfortunately, we go through perimenopause and menopause at often the peak of our careers. 35 to 50, it could be anywhere there, but in our 40s, we tend to have, navigated our way up higher. And then women are reducing their hours or leaving the workforce down to symptoms. And it's costing a lot for businesses. So we're seeing that as another model that could be really helpful and good for businesses. And it's going to save them a lot of money by managing those women as they're in the workforce. So it's ever evolving, but currently it's direct to consumer and we're working directly with women and we want to be their partners as they go through perimenopause.
Yeah,
Um,
I
yeah.
follow the logic of that. Well, I mean, what's interesting is you've got quite a clear sort of roadmap. I mean, you're describing the way forward as you see it, and it's good to see how clear that is. What do you think, what would you say are the big challenges, the big obstacles that you're going to have to overcome to get to where you want to get to?
Well, there's lots of obstacles, but I guess the main challenges for us are, well, adoption by clinicians, like getting the demand the first is getting the demand from users, the consumers. Direct to consumer is a tough route.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yes, we know that women are looking for answers, and these are women that have been to their doctors, not got answers, gone out there, tried everything, and they're still not getting answers. So we have the answer for them that they're looking for, but we're a new products, and it means that we really have to, at scale, be able to tell our story to women so they understand how it's going to bring value to them. And we're seeing now that a lot of the other wearables in the space, not in the perimenopause space, but just in, sleep, or it might be sports performance, they have added midlife as a part of their portfolio, but they're not using sensor technology for it. It's still the kind of self-reporting. So it's making sure that women understand that we're different. We are purpose built for perimenopause. We are detecting symptoms. We're not asking them to self-report. Everything is built around perimenopause. So that's the storytelling, which is everybody's, big, I guess, challenge initially is,
Yeah.
can you storytell at scale? Because I can't stand in front of hundreds of thousands of women directly. I need to be able to get a team around me, which we feel really confident in our team going forward now in being able to do that. But that's challenge one. Once we've done that is, can we get them to do more than just wear the Peri device? Can we get them to make action, go to their doctors and tell them, I want better, talk to more women and get kind of a movement going, because that movement is what's going to help us move towards those second models.
Let me ask you about that because that is a really interesting challenge. I mean, turning information provision, this is what we do, telling people, and that's one thing. Persuading people to change their behavior is a completely different thing, isn't it? I mean, what are your thoughts on that jump? Making that jump from, telling your story, sharing information to women actually acting on that and changing the way they do things. I mean, it seems to me I mean, it's a big jump actually, and quite a difficult jump to make. I mean, what are your thoughts on how you're going to overcome that?
So what we're seeing is that when women get encouragement, so when we talk about our engine giving personalized insight,
Mhm.
we actually often refer to it as encouragement. And the reason being, when you look at behavioral change, if you look at like weight loss, a perfect example, many people are told what to do, and then it's really, really hard to adhere to because there's no encouragement there. It takes time. And let's look before we had Ozempic, which is a different era now, and I'm very happy that we're in that area. But before that, there were lifestyle changes you could make, but it was really hard to stick to.
Yeah,
When it comes to perimenopause, they're having symptoms, they're bothersome, they do want to relieve them. But often with lifestyle changes, particularly, it takes time. But with what we have now, we can actually see really subtle changes
right.
over time. And with those subtle changes, it means that instead of waiting 5 weeks before you see anything, after week one, we can say, actually, those behavioral changes, when you did, your meditation or your yoga or your run, whatever it might be that we see in the patterns, at 6 a.m. instead of 8 o'clock at night, we see an improvement in your anxiety.
It is positive reinforcement, is what you're saying.
It's positive reinforcement, and they're really small steps, and that's why we always call it encouragement, because we're like, they actually need encouragement to keep up with that. So we have kind of built that in from day one, knowing, like, I have done a lot of clinical trials, so is my co-founder, and the biggest issue you have when you run trials is the trial participants never do what you ask them to do. They do it for a week and then they'd like just stop doing it. And they even make it up. We used to do food diaries and you'd be like looking at it going, this isn't right. And it's because they kind of forgot and they wrote it in the last day. And that's okay. It's human behavior, So we kind of knew from the start that we needed to look at human behavior and be able to integrate that as a part of the solution.
Yeah, yeah, okay. And I mean, that's a really interesting point, actually, about that gap there between what people actually do and what you want them to do. That's a really interesting thing. Let me ask you about a sort of a variation on that. One of the things I think is interesting about building a business at the moment is that we're in a very, I mean, it's a very exciting period of time, but it's also there's so much uncertainty. I mean, a lot of people at the moment are wondering how AI is going to change their world. Yeah, there's huge amounts of uncertainty, and I mean, I think that's also the case in healthcare. I mean, there's a lot of change going on. Certainly in the UK, with lots of stuff happening with the NHS and stuff going on in the US. There's a lot of change happening. I mean, what's your feeling about as the CEO having to deal with that uncertainty, having to still make decisions about allocating resources, time, energy, money, in an environment where there's such a lot of change happening, where there's so much uncertainty? I mean, what's your feelings about that?
Well, to me, AI is, when used right, is really positive, right? It can really accelerate
Mm.
across lots of boards, but in healthcare, it can really accelerate the understanding. And for a sector like us, women's health, where we're so behind, what we want to do is to use AI so that we can catch up with you guys. We deserve it. We don't want to be sitting around waiting for 20 years. So if we can use AI for that. So what is important though, and what we are emphasizing, and we're working with, different stakeholders. So we're researchers, we're working with innovators like us, we're working with advocates to make sure this is happening, is that we have to get the right data sets into the AI to be able to do this correctly and not increase the bias that actually existed there before. Because ultimately, what we're seeing is that AI can help us do all the boring tasks. So for doctors, it can write up all the notes at the end. It's brilliant. Like, why use the doctor's precious time to do that? AI can help them diagnose quicker because it can do the first scan, but you still need a human eye currently anyway. And for a long time, I mean, it's not taken over the whole sector. It's taken away the jobs that we don't really like. And for women's health, it's about getting the data in, because AI learns from something. It's taking previous data and applying that to its thought process. So unfortunately, where we are in women's health is that the previous data is very male biased, white males, and then potentially black males, and then women, and then different ethnicities. There's just a bias there already. So what we need to do is to collect data sets at scale, like we're doing and like some other organizations are doing, and feed that into the AI. And what that allows us to do is to, produce innovation and understanding so much faster, and then make sure that we don't increase the bias that was there before. So I'm really positive about it. And I can also tell you that we're a really small team, and we would not be able to do all the things we've done over the last 5 years if we didn't have AI in the last few. Even compared to the first year we started to now, I mean, there's days where I'm doing four people's jobs, and it's not because I'm superwoman. It's because I now have a tool that can really help me accelerate
It's
that work.
extraordinary technology, isn't it? Let me ask you about decision making. I mean, one of the challenges is uncertainty, and another one, I think. I mean, I talk to a lot of CEOs, and one of the things that's interesting is the distractions. The noise that is around in the environment, and strategy is. I mean, somebody famous, I can't remember who said, strategy is about mainly what you don't do rather than what you do. And the point they're making is there's a billion things you could do. You have to work out what the right things are to do. I mean, what's your take on kind of you're cutting through the noise of all the things that are going on and working out where you're going to focus your time and energy. I mean, what's your thoughts on that process?
So we very, very early on had a really great idea, by the way. It was brilliant. It was really broad. And we went in and we did actually a course in UCSF during COVID where you learned how to really commercialize science. And we went in there with this full plan written, still in jobs, both of us were in jobs, but this was the new thing. And it was great. We got good feedback, but generally they were also saying, "But what's the product?" And I thought, "What's the I told you what the product was." And it showed us that actually there wasn't enough focus in it. Like, what's the steps to get there? Like, where do you start to get to this really lovely big vision, which is actually still the same vision we have today? That hasn't changed. But it was the steps to get to that big vision that wasn't clear in our first business plan. So to us, that was a great, great start before we kind of went into this. And what we do now is a couple of things. The first thing was for us to understand if we want to look at long-term health, which was our vision for women, where's the inflection point? We know that, risk factors, they spike post-menopause. So perimenopause is the leading period up to that. We need to start there. That's where those risk factors change. And what are the risk factors we should focus on that matters today for a woman? So as you mentioned earlier, how do you keep your focus, but how do you get women engaged? You get them engaged by giving them something they worry about today, not in 20 years. What are they worried about today? So for us, it was always about trying to find out what actually matters to the consumer right now. So that was perimenopause. We know that that matters for long-term health, but actually we're catching them at a time where they're looking for solutions. They're worried about their health. We catch them now, and then we follow them through to this long-term health journey. And what we've done ever since then is we do a lot of research with women. So we have had about 500 women that aren't friends and family. So 500 women that we have surveyed, that we have asked, look, what are the most important symptoms to you to track? Like what would give the most information? And then we've talked to doctors and said, what are the most important symptoms for you to understand? And then we go back and say, okay, so these are the top, let's say the first time we got hot flushes, night sweats, sleep, anxiety, were the main, and brain fog were the top five. So then we go back and say, okay, what can we technically do? These are the top five. And currently we're tracking 4 of the top 5. So we always use the end users to try and figure out what's important, but making sure that we can also technically do it. So there's a few things that we have to
Yeah.
go after.
Tricky balance, it sounds.
Yeah, exactly. It is a balance. And then now, as we have just launched, it's about optimizing that experience. How do we make it sticky and interesting without it just being a product that's spitting information at you? We have, we know that the core information we provide is valuable. But as I talked about the insights, we get a weekly, a monthly, and a cyclical insight. So how do we get them to day 7 where they get real data, information in text space to understand how do we keep them engaged until the 7 days so they can see that value? And how do we keep them engaged to the 1 month mark where they get real information, deep information on the patterns and what's going to work? Because that's a little bit in the encouragement part. Yes, we give information, but we need them to understand that you need to get to the 1 month mark to really get the deep information. So it changes all the time. Right now, that's what we're focusing on. It's making sure that they get to that really valuable point and keeping them interested without it being like, thumbs up, you're doing great,
Well,
making
I
it
guess if you've
meaningful.
got plenty to keep you busy there. Let me ask.
Yeah.
Let me ask you. You mentioned that you got a small team. I mean, one of the other interesting things about being a CEO is about how you build a team. I mean, I know there's a lot of talk at the moment about a one-person AI-based unicorn, and that's great if that happens. But for most businesses, there's an element of you've got to bring a team on board to make the kind of progress that people want to make. And that means that there's then a challenge around how you enable, if you've only got a small team, how do you build a culture that enables those people to thrive, to perform at their optimum, their maximum level, because it's a small team, you haven't got a lot of slack. So you need people that are operating at a fairly high level. And What's your take on how you build a culture that enables that kind of performance to, that enables people to thrive?
So it starts at recruitment, to be honest. And we did a lot of work and we learned a lot from the recruitment process. I know we're a small team, but we're very proud of what we have built and the team we have built. And we are a team of all women. We have my co-founder was his man, and that wasn't because we didn't allow for men to apply, but as a part of the recruitment process, showing that passion and understanding of the area and wanting to be a part of, I talked about the movement of the consumers, but we actually really needed those first. We know it changes at huge scale, but those first people that came in, we needed them to feel really passionate about what we were doing. And as you can imagine, that would just come more natural for women when they were coming in. So they probably got a lot of points for that. And I do find that even from previous work, there's a certain type of people that are doers and can learn anything. You know, they might not come and have the highest skills on the CV. And what we found is, I mean, and I'm not going to talk, they're incredible girls that had, she had a PhD, and it's not like they weren't educated. But women tend to undersell themselves in interviews. So what we learned is that we needed to ask questions differently to get the best out of women. They'd be like, "Oh, I'm not really that good at that." Turns out they actually had lots of experience in that. While we found very often with men that they were great at everything, and we're going, "Wow, like wow, that's a lot of."
Striking.
Yeah, so I mean, that's really black and white, right? There's nuances here, but we learned that we actually had to go and interview differently. So it started with the recruitment process. So once you get someone that comes in that we feel can learn anything, they might not be quite there. And often in startups, you think, oh no, but I need someone to hit the ground from day one. But what we found with a lot of the people that had maybe lots of work behind them, they're very senior, is that they've kind of lost the doer effect, because we can't afford to have people that just tell other people what to do. We need people to come in, be passionate about it, do it, and be able to think, strategically as well. But we found that they learn as we work together. And we've been very flat because we're such a small organization. When I say a flat organization, it means we've been sitting together for, days or weeks where we had an issue, where we all were at the same level. We were just trying to figure out how to fix this. And it meant that those people that were in charge of that felt that they were supported, but we weren't taking their task, but they felt open enough to go to us and say, I'm not figuring this out. So to us, that has been kind of where we've been and where we are today. Um, what we're seeing now, though, as we're going into the market, is we need to start getting the ones that really understand market launch. And I don't think you can, the one person AI depends on the sector you're in. Like we're going direct to consumer, there's lots of consumer behavior. There's, you can go by the playbook, which is probably what AI will give you, but that's not necessarily what we can do in women's health. So we're trying to really get those brains together that are passionate about area, that have different skill sets, like maybe direct to consumers. We have people that are really good at manufacturing, and just building not necessarily the team in-house, but teams around us that we feel for now have the best experience that can help us as we move forward. So culture, just building that culture and making sure that to us, it's been really important that they know that they can come to us. And there's never, which it never should be, but I've worked in organizations like that before. There's never a blame game. This is about, we have a challenge and we see the challenge, but now we have to find the solution. We don't sit and dwell on the challenge because we don't have time for that.
Yeah.
It's solution orientated. Yeah.
So one of the other interesting things, I mean, picking up your point about people, is that we're also building businesses, building organizations in what you might describe as the social media age. And what I mean by that is that any member of your team, any customer, any user, any woman could go and write whatever they want on social media, which means that there's a risk there. There's an element of risk, and there's also tremendous scrutiny. I mean, when I started in business 40 years ago, there was not the same kind of scrutiny that there is now. I mean, everything gets in the spotlight in this day and age. What's your feeling about building? I mean, and I'm thinking particularly about the type of business that you're building and the kind of problems that you're trying to solve for women. What are your feelings about doing that in an age where there's so much scrutiny?
Look, I think that's the same across all sectors, and we know that from the core, what we're trying to do and we are doing is bringing value to women. And if there's scrutiny on the value we're bringing, what we will use that for is feedback to understand if it's real scrutiny that we need to work on. But as I said, we have always had women guide our products, and we will continue to do that. And we expect scrutiny, but we also expect this community that we want to build. And I think that's a big part of it, is that if you can build a good, and like I said before, I feel like I have lots of women behind me, and that's that community building, is that yes, there's going to be scrutiny from some places. But if you have that community behind you, you can always kind of come back with the positive stories and why we're doing this. And to be honest, that's what we're seeing as the positive thing now, is you can spread a message so much faster. And yes, you can spread scrutiny, but we don't expect that there's going to be big groups going against that, because we know from the core that this has been built from scientific knowledge, that we know that women need this information. Not all women will want it or need it, but we know that it's a need. So to me, these things are going to happen. I feel really supported by the community we have and by the team, and that's how we'll continue to move forward. We'll respond if it's necessary to respond, and I think it's being careful there as well. Sometimes you need to things let things go, but it's managing that messaging out there, that the overall message becomes what we're looking for, which is we're bringing value to you and we're working for you and we're hearing you as a woman. And that's
I
that's
mean,
what we have to
great.
go back to.
From my perspective, it's great to hear that it's based on science, but not everyone believes in science, do they? I mean, look at what's happened with vaccinations and the kind of anti-vax movement. I mean, it's not. So I take your point about science. Science is actually in healthcare. I mean, it's got to be
The
important,
basis.
but not everyone buys into that, do they? Which I think is the bit that I think is quite um, challenging. It's probably the way to put it. It'd be interesting to see how that plays out as you get better data and as you're able to share that, and whether you get a big buy-in from everyone, or whether there are people that perhaps don't buy into that. I mean, it'd be interesting to see what happens on that.
Interest in understanding science. So they're very smart consumers and
Mm,
in their kind of that age range, and they're actually really trying to get through the noise that we talked about before. It's a really, really noisy market when you look at menopause and perimenopause. A lot of supplements, and some of them are very effective, a lot of them aren't.
mm.
So actually consumers are listening to doctors, they're listening to scientists, and that's what they're drawn towards. So we're seeing that as a really, really important point. And yes, you hear about the anti-vaccines, anti-pharma. We're not pharma or vaccines. It's not a drug, it's data collection. So we sit in a different space, and actually with the type of data collection we are doing, we can actually help you better understand if you're if you're on hormone therapy or if you're on anything that's pharmacological. We're actually tracking that for you and giving you feedback. We're not selling pharmacological products. So we sit in a slightly different
Yeah, I
part
get
of
that.
the
I get
science. Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. And I think that's a really important point to make, actually. Let me ask you about. I know you've got big ambitions for this. One of the things that interests me is that as businesses begin to globalize, I mean, doing business, for example, in Dublin is very different from doing business in LA or Berlin or whatever. I mean, what are your but you're dealing with people, women specifically. I mean, women's needs in London will be slightly different to women's needs in LA, for example, or certainly how they perceive those situations, I suspect. What's your thoughts on how you, if you like, localize what you do to account for those kind of cultural nuances in different parts of the world as you start to sort of go into those markets and work with those women? I mean, what's your thoughts on how you handle that?
So I suppose perimenopause is universal, but cultures aren't, and the way it's perceived isn't. So just to give an example of when we first started, so we're based in Ireland. The company's based in Ireland. Our first market is the US. But when we first started, we did, mostly our research here in the UK and Ireland, like understanding it. And the conversation was bubbling. There's been a lot of conversation around perimenopause and menopause for quite a while. So that taboo that existed was kind of going away. I'm not saying it's gone, but I'm saying we're talking about it now. Women are saying, look, I want to better. So we thought, okay, that's great, but we're going to the US. It's a bigger market. Let's check it out. We went to the US, started at CES, so Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, one of the biggest consumer electronic shows in the world, if not the biggest. And we had a stand and we were really just checking it out. This is a few years ago. And people didn't know what perimenopause was. They were like, what is that? I've heard about menopause and what's premenopause? And I was like, it doesn't even say premenopause. It says perimenopause. You're not even reading it right. So, we were standing there, we're like, oh my goodness, this is not our market. They don't even know what we're trying to do here. And it was interesting. We then went back to Ireland. We engaged with the branding company that was based in the US. We went through a lot of kind of work with them to try and understand the users. And we started seeing that actually the conversation was changing, but not enough yet.
Right.
And we did a rebrand, but all the rebranding and all the messaging and all the kind of marketing material was based on research done on US women,
Right.
which did look very different from the UK and Ireland. And then we went back to CES the next year and it had flipped.
Wow.
We went in there and suddenly we got all this interest and they're like, perimenopause is the space. And we had men coming up and we had men in tears. We did that the same this year, talking about their wives. It was like in 12 months, it had flipped. And it had flipped because they had started seeing the movements in the UK and Ireland. Yes, they were delayed, but they're catching it quickly because the US, once they start spreading messages, they're fast.
Yeah, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah, they are. So you see that they're catching up very quickly. But they came out with a menopause documentary in the October before we came back, and it blew up. And actually, the next documentary is on perimenopause that's just launching now in March. And when we heard about that, we were straight after them, and we're the only tech company that will be in that documentary.
Wow.
And what we saw now was instead of the US being not our market, we're like, it's the market where we have a chance to lead the way because they're early. And if we are at the forefront, it gives us an opportunity to be differentiated, to be the first doing this. So that's why we went out after the US market. But if you look at Asian markets, for example, I'll be honest, we haven't explored enough. But we have been talking to a couple of people that have worked hard on getting femtech into Japan. And they've been trying for years and it's really not moving yet. They said it's so difficult because there's this stigma around women's health in general, and they're finding it so hard to get the messaging through. And what I found very interesting that I listened to another podcast, and I can't tell you which podcast it was because I can't remember, but it was about Lavazza. I think it was the coffee bean
Oh,
going
yeah.
into Japan years and years ago. Did you hear about this?
I think it will tell the story. I think I've,
Yeah, and
yeah.
it kind of made me understand that actually Japan might be just a very, very different market, but we have been told that already that you really do need people on the ground, like you need to really get into the culture. But what I think it was Lavazza, what they did was they went in there and they did a long-term strategy of about, 15 years. And what they were told was first you make a cartoon because they don't drink coffee in Japan. They don't like coffee, they drink tea. So first you make a cartoon, you get the kids to love the cartoon. Then you make a candy, and this is what they did. They made a little candy that was based on the cartoon with a coffee flavor. So those kids then started eating the candy with the coffee flavor. And as they grew up, they now had acquired the taste of coffee. And then they launched coffee in Japan. And I mean, that's not a strategy we have, but I just thought it was really interesting to see that they had launched so easily in other markets, but then in Japan, they had to take this really long-term strategy. So what we're seeing is, yes, you have to approach every market differently. I think everybody knows that, but you actually really do have to think about what are your short-term
Yeah.
goals?
I
Where
mean,
do you want to go long-term?
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, that what you're also talking about is the importance of kind of long-term thinking. And I've seen that in other situations as well. And that's actually really important because, I mean, most of the entrepreneurs I speak to, it never happens fast enough for them. I mean, some of them are going pretty fast, but when you talk to them, they say, "Oh, it would be great if it just went a bit faster." And I think that's something that is part of the kind of entrepreneurial DNA is that people want to make it happen tomorrow or today or yesterday. And actually,
Yeah.
long-term thinking is really important because these things don't always change overnight, do they?
Yeah.
Let me ask you about the journey that you've been on. I mean, when you look back, what are the big things that you've learned? Have you changed, for example?
Oh, it's been a huge personal growth. This is the first time I'm an entrepreneur, and it wasn't the plan. It just became the plan when we realized the gaps and the impact we could make. But the personal growth has probably been the biggest growth. And whether that is good or bad for other people around me, but for me, it feels, one of the main reasons where I still want to continue to do it. And I think what I spent the first year worrying about and sleepless nights now becomes, that was silly to spend my nights thinking about because there's so much bigger problems ahead. And I think what I've learned over time is that when we hit a hurdle, which is, if not every day, every week, that's the truth and the stage we're at. It's not, there's good things happening, but there's never all good. There's always, and I'm not calling them bad things, there are obstacles. Is that I look at it now and think, well, in 5 years, I'm going to laugh at this obstacle because it's going to be much bigger. So I just like, if I can't handle this, forget about in 5 years. And I'm not saying I don't care. I do care, but it's all about, so I've gotten much better. And I thank my co-founder for that. So we're two different people. I would be much more emotional, like get excited. Oh, that was crap. And, spend a bit of time down there thinking, oh, he is the most stable, doesn't get excited, doesn't get particularly upset. And to me, I've learned a lot from that. I'm still have a bit of more of a range than he does. And that's okay because we're complementary, but learning to really control what you should focus on and how to focus when you see an obstacle has been a huge growth for me because if you just see the obstacle, it's really stressful. But if you start looking at the solutions, and the only time that I get really worried is if there is actually no more solutions. Like we've tried four and we can't think of a fifth. And to date, that hasn't happened.
Mm.
There's always another way. So I think that's been a huge personal growth and balancing, and I think that's the same for a lot of women, balancing home life and work because you become so passionate about what you do.
Mm.
But obviously you're equally passionate or more passionate about your kids and seeing them grow up and, be a support system for them. I'm really, really lucky to have a husband that's, so supportive and helps me and I can travel and he takes over here and we haven't needed or had any help beyond us two managing the
Right.
kids. But it's a bit of a juggle. But what I found is that I have open conversations with my 6-year-old and my 10-year-old where I explain why I'm doing this, that I explain why I have to do something so that they understand it nearly like as if they were adults, just so that they've heard it, whether they understand it, but they have conversations and, you know, they're huge supporters too. Like even the other day, they were like, we think it's so cool what you're doing. It's so
That
cool.
must be
They're
really
so
nice, actually. That must be
it
really,
is. It
yeah.
is. And it's a battle for parents, because you think, oh, am I doing too much there and not enough here? But if you have those, well, I found with my kids, if I have those open conversations, at least they understand it and they're like, you're doing that for us too. So that's been big learnings for me.
Yeah. And I want to ask you a question that's sort of related to that. I mean, lots of entrepreneurs I speak to would describe what, the role of the CEO is a bit of a roller coaster, good days, bad days, everything in between. What is it about this particular business, this particular proposition that kind of gets you out of bed every morning to ride that roller coaster? I mean, what is it about this specifically that motivates you?
It's the women I'm doing it for. And I think we've seen this before. Like women tend to start businesses that has an impact, that has either a societal impact, a health impact, some type of impact. And yes, I started because I cared, but now I feel like everybody that have been working with me cares. We're doing this together. So I don't wake up in the morning and think, oh, like I said earlier, I'm not alone in this.
Mm.
I'm not waking up and have to face the world on my own. I'm facing the world with my co-founder, with the girls that we're working with, and all those women that have been either involved in giving us data, that are emailing us, that are reaching out to their networks. So I wake up every day thinking, I have to do this for them, but I also want to do this. I
Yeah.
feel like the roller coaster is the roller coaster, but I've never done anything that gives me more satisfaction
Mm.
in what I'm doing. And I've done some really, like, I'm a scientist, I've done some really cool things, that felt meaningful, but this by far, because it really feels like we're not just Peri, but actually all the companies in women's health are working together to say, like, we're making a change,
Yeah.
and we're going to change this for the better. So yeah,
Pretty rewarding.
it's
Pretty rewarding, I'd have thought.
very,
Let me
yeah.
let me ask you a couple of sort of final questions. If you look back on that journey, is there anything that you know now that you wish you'd known when you started?
The things I know now that I'm happy I didn't know when I started, maybe more so. Things like how hard it is to build
Yeah.
hardware, that everybody told me, everyone told me when I started it's really hard to build a business. And you think, yeah, 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 I get it's hard. It's hard. I get that it's hard. You really don't get how hard it is until
That's
you're
right.
in it. Like, it's so
Yeah.
much harder than you would ever imagine. And I'm glad I didn't get it. People told me, but it wasn't sinking in.
Think it
Because
would
I
put you
am,
off? Do you think that would put you off if you were starting again?
um, no, it wouldn't put me off because my personality is, I'm thinking here, but like, I don't think it would because I can see where we are now, how we got there and how rewarding it is. But I don't think it's for everyone. And I think it would put off a lot of people at this stage. They'd be like, because I've met a lot of founders that feel really beaten,
Yeah.
and they were like, and even they've gotten out and they feel really beaten. And that can change. And I certainly, when I started off, was totally naive, and and I am an eternal optimist, to be honest. I'm always optimistic, so that stands to me, but it's not probably always positive for everyone around because I always think it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. So I think that's why I'm getting through it, and I wouldn't change it. But I certainly, it was things that were told to me that I didn't understand. So I'm not saying I would have changed it, but I'm glad I didn't know about it. And I'm glad I didn't know how complex hardware was. Everyone said hardware is really hard.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, you know, it's hard, but we can do it. And, and I know there's people are telling me things that are going to be hard in the next while. I'm going, yeah, we can do it. And I should know now that what they're saying is probably true.
Yeah.
But, I'll just go through it and tell you this again in a few months and say, oh, they told me it's really hard to go direct to consumer. And I didn't really listen and I did it anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And one last question. If you were to give some advice to a rookie CEO starting out, I mean, what advice would you give them?
Well, I'm just going to first say I'm early too. So I'm a CEO of a small organization.
Yeah.
I would call myself as a
But you've been
co-founder.
on a
So
bit of a
just
journey, haven't you?
I've been on a journey and I'm happy to say that, but I just want to, like, sometimes I feel like, you get asked to give advice as if you run this billion-dollar business, but that's not where we are. But I've certainly been on a journey as a founder and been given the title CEO and am the front person of the company. Um, I think surround yourself with the right people around you so you don't feel so lonely. That's probably the main thing. I have a co-founder. I don't want to say that everybody needs a co-founder because I know some solo founders hate hearing that. But if you don't have a co-founder, you've got to find someone that would just kind of be on the journey with you and understand when things are going up and down because it can get really difficult. And it's those difficult times that it's hard to not have someone to share it with. And as I said, I have a husband that's super supportive and I'm sure he'd listen to everything, but I actually don't want to sit and tell him everything that happens every day about my business because then we lose what we got together
Yeah.
for.
Yeah.
So finding someone that can be that kind of, if it's not a co-founder, if it's one of your first hires, but that can be with you throughout that journey and that really hold on to them and give them what they deserve. And that's what we've done, give shares to early hires that are really valuable. because we don't want them to go. They're too valuable on a product level, but they're also too valuable to us as support and understanding the knowledge they sit on from the start. So that's probably the biggest
Yeah,
thing.
and I think that's great advice. Actually, I mean, surround yourself with smart people is universally good advice. I think. I mean, obviously the details different in different situations, but why would you surround yourself with people that aren't great? I mean, you want to be around great people, don't you? That makes it
Yeah.
easier for everyone, I think. So, anyway, Heidi, thank you for that. Great piece of advice, a great proposition, and a really interesting story. So, thank you for taking the time to share it, and good luck going forward. I mean, it's a pretty important thing you're working on, and I really hope it goes well.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And yeah, I've heard D2C is hard, but we're doing it. So
Good luck.
thanks.
Cheers, Heidi. Bye bye.